are watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. We have heard from a First Nations perspective and a Catholic perspective on the Pope's visit to Canada and apology. Today we will hear a Métis perspective with President CASSIDY CARON, President of the Métis National Council. But first, some news headlines. Number of Canadians who speak neither official language hits record high. Canada's electric vehicles to be included in US tax credits. Central Newfoundland town to build mosque for Muslim doctors. Blast in Kabul mosque kills at least 21, injures several. Now the details. 1 in 4 Canadians speak a mother tongue other than English or French, indicate new data released Wednesday by Statistics Canada. A media source reports Eric Caron-Mélenchon, Assistant Director of the Centre for Demography at Statistics Canada, saying that the increase is due to a large number of Canadians speaking South Asian languages. English and French are still the most common languages spoken, but the number of Canadians who usually speak a language other than English or French has hit a record high, around 13%. Mandarin, Punjabi, Arabic and Urdu are among the top languages growing in the country. The overall percentage of French-speaking individuals continued to decline in 2021. Electric vehicles built in Canada will be included in United States tax credits aimed to support the North American auto industry. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has tweeted the good news for Canada's auto industry. As part of the Inflation Reduction Act 2022 passed by the US, the government will invest in domestic energy production and bring down carbon emissions. The act is to provide provisions for the electric vehicle supply chain, which will benefit the Canadian electrical vehicle market. This comes after months of high-pressure lobbying from Justin Trudeau and others that began in November last year. In Canada, 5.8% of new auto sales are electric, while 7.7% are electric and hybrid plug-in. Gander, a town in central Newfoundland, is working together with the local Muslim community to build its first mosque. Dr. Mohammed Barassi, director of the Central Newfoundland Islamic community and the town's mayor, Percy Farwell, hope that a mosque will encourage Muslim doctors to stay. The mayor says, according to a media source, that although the town has welcomed internationally trained Muslim doctors in the past, it is unable to retain them. Barassi says a local mosque would serve a critical need for the small community of nearly 100 Muslims in the surrounding areas. No group has claimed responsibility for Wednesday evening's blast in a mosque in Kabul, Afghanistan's capital city. The mosque was packed with worshippers. The bombing has killed at least 21 people, including the mosque's imam. More than 24 others are wounded, including at least 5 children. Nearby buildings were damaged in the blast. The number of bombings across Afghanistan has declined since the Taliban returned to power in August last year. However, recent attacks targeting minority communities have rocked the country, including some claimed by the jihadist Islamic State group. This week, the Taliban marked the first anniversary of their return to power following a turbulent year that saw women's rights crushed and a humanitarian crisis worsen. And that's it for the news. Pope Francis has come to Canada, made an apology and left, but Indigenous, Métis and Inuit people are still digesting his trip, the apology, what it means for their future. To talk to us today about Métis perspective, we are joined by President CASSIDY CARON, who is the president of the Métis National Council. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure many of our viewers are a little bit confused about what the difference between Indigenous and Métis, and you've probably had to answer this question many, many times. But could we just start out with a little bit of History 101 and explain what Métis means?
So there is no difference between Indigenous and Métis. Indigenous is an umbrella term used to describe the three peoples who are Aboriginal peoples to these lands here in Canada. So under the umbrella of Indigenous or Aboriginal, there's actually First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Métis are one of the 3 rights-holding peoples here in this country, recognized by Section 32 in the Canadian Constitution. And we have a unique culture, history, language, socioeconomic background, as peoples here in Canada.
I must have been misreading that in the press then. I always thought I saw Indigenous, Métis, Inuit, but it's probably been First Nation, Métis, Inuit. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
All right, so then the next question would be, what's the difference then between a First Nation and a Métis people?
So, like I say, we have unique histories, we have unique backgrounds, traditions, cultures, than First Nations and Inuit. And we are distinct people from First Nations and Inuit. And, you know, there are distinctions between the many First Nations groups here in Canada as well. There isn't just one nation of First Nations people in Canada. And so there's a lot of nuances, a lot to learn to understand who First Nations, Métis, and Inuit are. But it is first and foremost really important to recognize that there are distinctions between First Nations, Métis, and Inuit.
Well, obviously we can't do all of history in a quick interview, so let's move on. We have had a hereditary chief from a British Columbia First Nation on the show explaining how he and his people were reacting to the Pope's visit. Tell us a little bit about Métis perspectives.
So, you know, the apology that was delivered on Canadian soil a few weeks back now was received differently by different people. It's very individual based on, you know, what your experiences are as Métis, the unique experience that you may have had in the past with the Catholic Church. And so for some, it was really important that Pope Francis come here and deliver the apology, and it was meaningful to many. For others, it will never be enough. Words simply cannot fix what has happened in the past and the legacies that we continue to live with today. And it's important to recognize the diversity across the Métis Nation. But, you know, for some survivors, it was truly important.
I understand that some of the founders or some of the early leaders of the Métis people were actually Catholics themselves. Is there a big Métis population that are also Catholic? How does it mean to have sort of both those identities in this situation?
So Métis spirituality is complex and can be understood. You know, it's very individual. It's based on, you can think of Métis spirituality as a continuum where some choose to practice Catholicism and others choose not to. And for some, you know, there's a blend of traditional Indigenous spirituality practices with Catholicism. And, you know, it's not as simple as saying X number of Métis citizens practice Catholicism and some don't. So it is a very complex situation. It is a very complex landscape that we are working with, and how everybody chooses to move forward with reconciliation, how everyone chooses to move forward with their own healing paths is very individual and self-determined by those individuals.
You're the youngest, I think, and first female president of the Métis National Council. Did you have a role to play in the negotiations that led up to this apology?
So I led the delegation to Rome, the Métis delegation back in the spring. For one individual to play a significant role doesn't exist within our nation. Everybody played a role, especially the survivors who've been advocating for this for generations now. It was the survivors whose voices that we uplifted, that we centered all of this work on. When we went over to Rome, we spent the majority of our time meeting with Pope Francis, giving the time to the survivors to share their unique stories. I would say those who had the most significant impact on the Pope and those who really contributed to Pope Francis's desire to want to do the apology would largely, that would be the voices of the survivors who were so brave and courageous to share their stories.
Are you able to share with us some of what they told him?
Well, for many, they simply just told the truth. They told the truth of what happened to them as children, being removed from their families and placed in institutions that sought to, disrupt our culture, disrupt our traditions, take so much away from our people, with the Catholic Church and the Canadian government's view that their ideas, their way of life, their way of spirituality and believing was better than ours. And so for survivors, they simply just shared the truth. And for some, they had horrible things happen to them, and they were open, they were honest, and they told the truth to the Pope, and it was enough to persuade the Pope to that he had to apologize and that something had to be done.
And were you present in the room while they were telling their stories?
Yes.
Is it part of your family tree as well, that you yourself, or you had people who were a part of the residential school system?
So that part of my family history has actually never been spoken about. And for now, both of my grandparents have passed on. For a long time, conversations about residential schools and the history within our own families, it was never spoken about. And it's only in recent years that many survivors from in these families have felt that it is okay to talk about it, that it is important to talk about it. It's only in recent history that Indigenous leaders have felt that it is important to talk about the truth, to move us forward. And I'm so grateful for those people who have the courage to do that. And, and every family is different, but for some families, they're still not talking about it.
And is that because it's been so traumatic that the easiest way to handle it is through forgetting and silence?
I would say that that plays a role within it for sure. Another part is that, and continuing today, that there is a large population of people within this country who still refuse to believe that this happened. And, when somebody has the courage to say what has happened in the past, to tell their truth, and they're met with people saying that they don't believe you, that's very unhealthy. That doesn't contribute to the safety of that individual who has that courage to share their stories. And so there's many nuances, there's many different things that have contributed to the fact that it hasn't been spoken about, and continues that way.
So the Pope's apology then must be validating.
For some it is, yes. And for the Pope to really express what he has heard and the ways that he has heard it from these people, to say that it has caused so much pain, and to talk about how he understands this to have happened in the past, it is validating for some. And I think moving forward, that will play a role in supporting, people to move away from denying that this ever happened.
You mentioned moving forward. What would you like to see happen next?
So there's a number of things that we have requested and continue to advocate from the Catholic Church. It's not just the Catholic Church that has a role to play within reconciliation, but for the Catholic Church specifically, we've left them with a list of actions that can be taken to contribute to a pathway forward for truth, justice, healing, and reconciliation. These are tangible actions that the Pope himself can play, the Vatican can play, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops can play. And, there's so many different pieces that go along with it. It starts with continuous conversation, being able to continually have these conversations with those who are making these changes on the ground today, and reassessing our priorities as we continue to move forward. And, we look forward to doing that work alongside the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops and the Holy See, and seeing the progress that we can make when we do, in fact, do this work together.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time for today's interview, but hopefully we can check in with you in a few months' time and get an update on this tangible list, what, if anything's happened from it or not. So thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe, and God bless.